Aboard the Black Maw, the air was thick with the scent of oil, ozone, and the lingering musk of unwashed bodies. The ship's dim, flickering lights barely illuminated the mercenary crew gathered in the main hold, their voices a chorus of guttural laughter and gutted boasts. The bounty of their latest raid stood at the center of it all, a human woman, bound at the wrists, her face unreadable. Captain Vorkesh lounged in his command chair, a throne of salvaged steel and leather, one clawed hand idly tapping against the armrest. The Zelenar warlord was massive even by his own kind standards, his battle-scarred hide a mottled pattern of deep greens and jagged black. He had survived more battles than most of his crew combined, and it showed in the way he carried himself, radiating authority without the need for wasted words. He watched the captive with an expression hovering between amusement and curiosity. "She's smaller than I expected," rumbled Gorthal, his deep voice resonating like grinding stone. The Brak Kai, enforcer, towered over most, his hulking frame wrapped in crude armor that had seen its fair share of blood. His species prided themselves on brute strength, and his four thick arms twitched as if itching to test her resilience. Hard to believe these creatures caused the Dominions so much trouble. Ralvek, the ship's tech specialist, scoffed as he ran a diagnostic check on his wrist-mounted interface. "That's because you see with your fists, Gorthal. Humans are dangerous because they think faster than we do. Adapt faster. The Dominion underestimated them once. You know how that ended." Gorthal grunted but didn't press the point. The room's atmosphere remained tense, however, the crew shifting restlessly. For all their bravado, there was an unspoken undercurrent of unease beneath their laughter. They had taken slaves before, raided colonies without hesitation, but this was different. This was a human. First mate Drozvan stepped forward, his mechanical limbs whirring softly. The Ctherian-esque cybernetic enhancements made him a formidable presence, half his body replaced with polished metal and advanced combat augments. His yellow eyes gleamed with something between suspicion and intrigue as he crouched in front of the captive, tilting his head. "Most prisoners beg," he murmured, "or at least struggle. You're calm." The woman's gaze met his, steady and unflinching. She had not spoken since being dragged aboard, her silence more unsettling than any defiance. It was as though she were waiting. Vorkesh finally stood, the sound of his movement enough to draw every mercenary's attention. He descended the short steps leading from his command chair to the center of the hold, his taloned feet clicking softly against the grated floor. When he stopped before the prisoner, he studied her with a predator's patience. "You understand what's happening, don't you?" His voice was a deep, almost soothing growl. "You've been taken. Your fate is no longer your own. There will be no rescue." Still, she did not react. He leaned in closer, inhaling the scent of her, something sharp, metallic, but distinctly human. His mandibles twitched in faint irritation. "I wonder," he mused, "if your kind is finally learning humility." At last she spoke. A single word, quiet but firm. "No." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ever-moving machinery of the ship seemed to hesitate. Drozvan's cybernetic fingers curled slightly, tension rippling through his frame. Gorthal bared his teeth, in a grimace, his secondary set of hands clenching at his sides. Even Ralvek, ever the skeptic, narrowed his eyes. Vorkesh's own amusement waned, replaced by a more calculating stare. He straightened, crossing his arms over his broad chest. "You have courage," he admitted, "but courage does not keep one alive aboard my ship. Information does, and I will have it." He turned sharply. "Drozvan, take her to interrogation." The Ctherian nodded, stepping forward to grab her by the arm. She did not resist, allowing herself to be led, but just as they reached the threshold of the hold, she paused, looking over her shoulder. "You think you're in control," she said, her voice calm, almost conversational. "But you don't understand what you've done." Vorkesh raised a brow ridge, intrigued. "Enlighten me." A small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. "You took me," she said. "That was your first mistake." Drozvan yanked her forward before she could say more, dragging her through the corridor. The doors sealed shut behind them, but the echo of her words lingered. The crew exchanged glances. The uneasy feeling in the room had grown heavier, more tangible. Even Gorthul, ever the brute, shifted uncomfortably. Ralvek exhaled sharply, breaking the silence. I don't like this. Vorkesh's eyes remained locked on the now-closed doors. A slow, thoughtful smile spread across his face. I do. Drozvan dragged the woman down the dimly lit corridor, the hum of the ship's engines thrumming beneath their feet. The Black Maw was an old warship patched together from the wreckage of a dozen battles, its walls a maze of exposed wiring and reinforced plating. The air smelled of metal and oil, thick with the stale musk of recycled oxygen. She walked without resistance, her expression unreadable, her breathing steady. It unsettled him. Most prisoners trembled, pleaded, cursed. She had done none of those things. The door to the interrogation chamber hissed open, and he shoved her inside. The room was stark, harsh lighting overhead, cold steel walls, a single chair bolted to the floor. A mechanical harness hung from the ceiling, designed to restrain even the strongest captives. Drozvan wasted no time securing her, metal cuffs locking around her wrists and ankles as he stepped back, his augmented eye scanning her vitals. Her heart rate remained steady. Too steady. Ralvek entered behind him, his wiry frame moving with quick efficiency as he activated the room's diagnostic systems. His interface flickered to life, holographic data streams floating in the air beside him. He barely spared the woman a glance. You want neural probes or traditional methods? He asked. Drozvan folded his arms, watching her. Let's start simple. He leaned in. You understand what happens now. The woman tilted her head slightly, as if considering the question. You ask questions. I answer. Or I don't. And then you hurt me. Gorthul chuckled from the doorway. He had come to watch, his hulking frame barely fitting in the confined space. Smart little creature, he rumbled. Knows her place already. She ignored him. Drozvan narrowed his eyes. We know you came from a colony transport. We know humans don't travel alone. Where were you headed? Silence. Ralvek flicked a switch, sending a pulse of electricity through the chair. Not enough to cause real damage, but enough to burn. The woman tensed, her jaw clenching, but she made no sound. The pain receptors in his interface spiked briefly, then leveled out. Drozvan had interrogated countless prisoners. He knew the signs of a mind breaking, the subtle shifts in posture, the tremors of fear. She had none of them. Tell me, he pressed, his voice low, measured. Are you military? Still, she said nothing. Ralvek turned to him, frowning. She's controlling her vitals, he muttered. Either she's been trained in resistance techniques, or she's more dangerous than she looks. Gorthul grunted. All humans think they're dangerous, until they're bleeding. Drozvan reached for his blade, the polished edge glinting under the cold white light. You are testing my patience. Finally, she spoke. You don't understand what you've done. Something about the way she said it made him pause. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a plea. It was a simple, undeniable truth. Ralvek glanced at Drozvan. This feels wrong. Gorthul scoffed. It's a game. Humans like games. They think they can outweed us. He stepped forward, gripping the woman's chin with two massive fingers, tilting her face up. Maybe she needs an example. She didn't flinch, didn't pull away. Instead, she met his gaze with something almost amused. You think you're the predators. Her voice was soft, even. That's your second mistake. Drozvan felt a cold prick of unease. He stepped back, motioning to Ralvek. Check the long-range scanners. Ralvek hesitated, then tapped at his interface. The holographic screen flickered, numbers scrolling too fast to read. He froze. There's movement outside the system, he murmured. His fingers danced over the controls. Multiple ships. Trajectory suggests military formation. Gorthul snarled. Coincidence. The woman exhaled a slow breath, as if waiting for them to catch up. No, she said. It's not. Ralvek's screen pulsed red. His voice turned sharp. They just disappeared from scanners. Drozven frowned. Cloaking? No, Ralvek swallowed. They're using human stealth tech. It's better than I've seen before. He turned to the woman, his voice quieter now. How did they find us? Her lips curved into a small, knowing smile. I let you take me. The silence in the room felt heavier than before. Gorthal's hands clenched. Lies, he spat. You expect us to believe you wanted this? Her gaze flicked to him. Yes. Drozven's mind raced. He had fought humans before. They were persistent, unpredictable, resourceful. But this was something else. The way she carried herself, the way she spoke. He glanced at Ralvek, who looked pale beneath his mottled skin. Check for transmissions, Drozven ordered. Ralvek's hands trembled slightly as he worked. Seconds passed. The screen flashed again. His throat tightened. She's been broadcasting since we took her. Drozven's grip on his blade tightened. Vorkesh had no. He turned to Gorthal. Get to the bridge? Gorthal hesitated, his arrogance warring with unease. But he went. Drozven looked at the woman once more. She was still smiling. Not the smug grin of a captive who had won, but something colder. Patient. He stepped back, pressing the intercom. Captain, he said, voice taut. We have a problem. The klaxon screamed through the corridors of the Black Maw, a sound that should have been routine, yet carried a weight no one aboard had ever felt before. Red emergency lights pulsed against the steel walls, casting jagged shadows as mercenaries scrambled to battle stations, weapons drawn, voices sharp with confusion and barely contained panic. Captain Vorkesh stood at the center of the bridge, his talons digging into the armrests of his command chair as he listened to the reports flooding in from every deck. Stealth ships, human, without a doubt, had materialized out of nothing, their signatures unreadable, their movements too precise for anything but a coordinated military strike. They had been outmaneuvered before they even realized the game had begun. Ralvek's voice crackled through the comms, strained but steady. They're running interference on our long-range comms. No distress calls are getting out. Vorkesh's mandibles flared. Weapons. Online, but targeting systems are scrambled. They've flooded our sensors with false readings. I can't get a lock. Drozven's voice cut, in next, lower, clipped with the weight of understanding. This was never a raid. This was an execution. Vorkesh turned slowly to face him as he stepped onto the bridge, the woman's warning echoing in both their minds. She had let them take her, not as a mistake, not as an accident, as bait. A blast rocked the ship, the impact sending crew members sprawling. The view screen flickered, struggling to compensate for the external damage. Out in the abyss, dark shapes moved like ghosts between the stars, their hulls swallowing light, their weapons invisible until the moment they struck. Gorthal's voice bellowed over the bridge intercom. Hull breach. Middecks are venting atmosphere. Vorkesh's claws flexed. Seal the bulkheads. Redirect power to another impact, closer this time, the deck shuddering beneath them. Sparks rained from overhead conduits as the lights flickered, systems struggling to keep up with the overwhelming assault. The Black Maw was a predator built for brutality, but it had no defenses against an enemy it couldn't see. Drozven took a slow step forward. Captain, he said, quiet enough that only Vorkesh could hear, we need to consider abandoning ship. Vorkesh turned on him with a snarl. Cowardice? Drozven didn't flinch. Survival. The bridge doors slid open, and for a single unbearable second, every gun snapped toward the woman standing in the threshold. She was unbound, unharmed. She had walked freely through a ship full of killers, and not a single one of them had stopped her. Vorkesh rose to his full height, eyes burning. Explain this. She met his gaze without hesitation. You thought taking me was an opportunity. Her voice was calm, steady, as if the chaos around her was irrelevant. It was a death sentence. The main display flickered again, and for the first time, a transmission forced its way through the jamming signals. A face appeared hard-edged and scarred, the uniform unmistakable. A human admiral. Vorkesh felt a slow, creeping realization settle over him. The Dominion had underestimated humans once before and paid for it in blood. He had believed himself smarter, more careful. He had been wrong. The Admiral's voice was a quiet, lethal thing. You have something of ours. Vorkesh's mind raced. The woman, no, not just a captive, not a civilian. A plant, a weapon. Drozven exhaled sharply, his cybernetic hand flexing. She's not leverage, is she? The woman smiled, the same patient, knowing smile that had unsettled them from the beginning. No, another impact, this one final. The ship's stabilizers groaned, and warning sirens blared through every deck. The hull was breaking. The Black Maw was dying. Vorkesh had always thought he would meet his end in glorious battle, his enemies before him, his blade in hand. He had never imagined this, a slow, creeping inevitability, set in motion before he had even realized he was at war. As the ship's lights dimmed, as the first escape pods jettisoned into the void, as the woman turned and walked away without a backward glance, he understood. The game had never been his to win. The Black Maw was dying. Flames licked at the bulkheads, casting jagged, flickering shadows through the ruined corridors. Atmosphere vented in violent gusts where hull breaches had torn through steel. The once mighty warship groaned as its structure twisted under the strain of the sustained bombardment. Emergency sirens wailed, half drowned by the sounds of distant gunfire, desperate last stands made by those too stubborn or too slow to abandon ship. Vorkesh moved through the chaos like a specter, his heavy footfalls measured, his breathing controlled. He had given the order to evacuate, but he himself had remained. He would not flee his own ship like prey scurrying from a flame. Whatever end awaited him, he would face it standing. A scorched bulkhead groaned as Drozven forced it open, stepping into the corridor, his cybernetic limbs gleaming with heat damage. He moved with purpose, his expression grim but steady. Most of the crew have launched, he reported. Gorthul is holding the lower decks with a handful of fighters. Ralvek is dead. Vorkesh did not react. There was no time for mourning, no space for sentiment. How long? Drozven glanced at the nearest flickering control panel, the red symbols painting his face in shifting hues of crimson. Hull integrity is below 20%. Power is failing across all decks. 15 minutes, maybe less, before we're nothing but debris. Vorkesh exhaled slowly. The battle was lost before it had begun. But there was still one thing left to do. They found Gorthul in the lower decks, his massive frame hunched over a barricade of wreckage, a heavy plasma repeater braced against his shoulder. His secondary arms gripped a mangled mercenary, tossing the corpse aside without ceremony. The Brakkai's armor was cracked, his exposed flesh singed, but his teeth were bared in something close to satisfaction. More of them coming, he grunted. They fight like ghosts. Don't show themselves until they want you dead. Drozven pressed against the bulkhead, scanning the corridor ahead. The ship's emergency lighting flickered, casting long stretches of darkness. Somewhere beyond, movement, a presence. Not frantic, not rushed, deliberate. Vorkesh tightened his grip on his rifle. They'll breach soon. Gorthul spat, his secondary hands tightening into fists. Good. Silence stretched between them, tense, expectant. Then, the lights flickered one final time and died, plunging them into darkness. It began without sound. No battle cries, no warning shots, just the whisper of movement, the unnatural stillness before the storm. Then came the first shot, searing through the air, striking one of Gorthul's men square in the chest. The mercenary crumpled, smoke rising from the hole where his heart had been. The corridor erupted into chaos. Vorkesh fired blindly into the darkness, his shots illuminating the flickering figures of their attackers, human operatives clad in black, moving with impossible precision. They weaved through the wreckage like wraiths, their weapons silencing before the trigger had even been pulled. Gorthul roared, charging forward, his plasma repeater screaming as it unleashed a torrent of molten death. One of the operatives flickered out of sight just before the blast struck, reappearing an instant later at Gorthul's flank. A blade flashed, clean, efficient, before sinking into the Brackai's exposed ribs. Gorthul stumbled, his secondary arms grasping at the wound. His breath came in ragged snarls. Yet he still turned, swinging a massive fist into the operative's head, sending the human crashing into the bulkhead with bone-shattering force. He grinned, blood pooling between his teeth. "Not so untouchable," he rasped. Then another shot rang out, and Gorthul collapsed. Droz Ven moved fast, his cybernetic limbs striking with mechanical precision. He caught an operative mid-lunge, twisting their arm until the bones snapped, using their body as a shield against the next barrage of fire. His augmented eye glowed in the dark, scanning for movement, calculating angles, seeking a weakness. "Too many," he growled. Vorkesh knew it too. The humans had not come for a battle. They had come for a kill. Then a voice. Quiet. Unshaken. "You're already dead." The woman. She stood at the far end of the corridor, her presence an anchor amidst the chaos. She did not carry a weapon, did not move to fight. She only watched. Vorkesh felt rage coil through him. "You did this." She tilted her head slightly, as if amused by the accusation. "You did this." Another shot. Droz Ven staggered, a bloom of red spreading across his side. His cybernetic hand twitched, his grip faltering. He turned, as if to say something, but another shot tore through his chest, silencing him before the words could form. Vorkesh was alone. His ship, his crew, gone. The black maw shuddered, its final breaths rattling through its dying frame. The humans did not press forward. They did not need to. He was finished. The woman stepped closer, her eyes steady. "You were warned." Vorkesh's claws flexed, his body tensed for one final strike. But then he understood. There was no battle left to fight. His grip loosened. The rifle clattered to the floor. The woman nodded once, as if acknowledging something unspoken. Then she turned and walked away, the darkness swallowing her whole. A final explosion rocked the ship, and the black maw fell into silence.